So I did 2 other videos to kind of get an idea of how much weight you could put into space with mainsails, orange tanks as a test, and this is a actual real delivery of a payload to a space station in orbit. So here I'm building up the first revision of my rocket, using some large diameter, I should say medium diameter tanks in the payload module to keep it shorter, and I started off with one Poodle engine at the very bottom. Forgot the ASAS module, so jam that in there. So this is now going to be a really 2-stage rocket. If you count the solid stage, that'll be 3. So now I'm adding on the first stage the first stage orange tanks. It'll be dropped off in pieces. I start off with 2 mainsails and the skipper to try and save some money on fuel. Eventually I decided to ditch that skipper in the middle because the fuel savings weren't very much and I got a lot more lift with the mainsails. I was also trying to skimp money-wise, but I kind of got away from that a little bit further on for performance. So here I'm tying fuel lines into the orange tanks because I'm going to be dropping those sequentially. Putting in some struts so the thing doesn't tear itself apart. The idea with those fuel tanks, or those fuel lines, is so I can drop off orange tanks 2 at a time and save weight. Sometimes the struts in this game go crazy, so now I've got them set up mostly properly with symmetry. Now I'm adding separatrons to get the debris away from the ship. So on the right you can see I'm playing with the staging, and I've got this sped up a lot so you don't have to deal with some of this tedium, but I'm grouping each separatron with its corresponding tank, and like I said before, those will drop off in pairs. Now that those are all squared away, it's time to start adding the solid state boosters and some other parts like RCS modules so I can control things, some lights so I can see what I'm doing, parachutes because I want to recover the payload module. And I'm locking out certain fuel tanks so I don't use them in flight. And I also like to put some boosters in the front so I can slow down when docking. So now it's time for the solid state boosters, and I want to put those on decouplers, which I think I forgot about initially. And I always like to use symmetry, because if you don't use symmetry on multi-axis or multi-section parts, the game tends to freak out and go out of control. So I'm using a 6 symmetry here. And I just set up staging so the parachutes last. Here I'm setting up the engines on separate toggle keys so I can turn on the front-facing engines and the Poodle engines separately. So that's the basic design of the rocket. Time to give this a try. So I sped up various parts of the video and monkeyed with the audio so that everything would work properly. So here's the solid state drop. Soon after that, the first set of orange tanks are dropped because they're empty. You can see how it's now draining that second set. Check out the orbital map real quick, see how I'm doing. Drop that second set of tanks. And drop the final set in those mainsails. You can see I'm tinkering around with where the fuel's being drained from. I want it to be drained from the middle to kind of keep the rocket more stable. It's also easier to transfer fuel when you have one big tank. And checking out the ISP of the engine for efficiency. You can see the parabolic flight I'm getting. This was kind of a draft run. I didn't necessarily do thrust weight calculations or delta V. I just had a rough idea of what I wanted to do. I ultimately decided I wasn't getting enough speed, and I was losing a lot of speed here, so I didn't have a fast enough upper stage, and it just wasn't going to work out. I also wasn't going to get enough fuel into orbit and eventually to the station that I wanted. So here I set up my final burn and saw it was going to be way longer than I wanted it to be, and realized this design just wasn't going to work at this point. Be burning at the most efficient part of that parabola up at the top, I'm probably going to be running into the Earth. This is just pretty much a failure, but you can learn from your mistakes. So now I'm adding multiple Poodle engines to give that upper stage more boost, and adding batteries as well and solar panels because I totally forgot those. So now you can see the second stage is connecting directly to the first with a decoupler. I'm adding a little bit more fuel on those other stages. There's those Poodles in the upper stage, so now I have 3 times the thrust. And I can also toggle them so I can turn them on when the lower stages are still burning to get extra thrust. So this one's sped up a lot. So you can see after you kick off the solid state boosters, things are going pretty well. The rocket's fairly controllable. I tried turning on the Poodles with the mainsails all still burning, and that put it wildly out of control, so I quit that pretty quickly. So once you're down to one central engine, then you can turn on the Poodles on the outer edge, and that works pretty well. It gives me some more thrust. So here I can tell I've drained my fuel, kicked off the first stage, but I still wasn't getting enough thrust and getting my rocket high enough to where I needed to rely solely on the second stage. So I wasn't quite happy with it. I wanted to get more fuel up. So at this point, after I tinkered around a little bit, I kind of realized I wanted to do this over again. You can see how low that fuel is there, and that's where I wasn't really happy. So even though I attained a good orbit and I could have docked, I just wouldn't have been very cost effective. So now I'm throwing in some more fuel at a couple places. Putting in some more fuel on the tanks that'll be dropped. And I started messing around with additional solid state boosters. And you have to be careful with these because they can easily put your ship out of control or cause issues during ejection, which you'll see very soon. I wanted these to burn the same length as the main set of solid state boosters, so I was using the large size at first. You can see this starts to go kind of haywire. So it's not the most stable thing. It gets the job done, it gets the rocket up there, but I've got some inefficient kind of angled burning that I want to get rid of. So a fairly safe flight, but I saw some room for improvement again. And here I'm manually moving fuel since I don't have automatic drain lines set up yet. So after the final stages dropped, I had some pretty good efficiency, but you could still get a little bit more. Use a little bit less of that valuable payload fuel. Alright, so now time to do those fixes. Replace that skipper with a mainsail for more thrust so I could get higher up. Put some struts in for reinforcement, and generally just started having a lot of problems. This is almost a blooper reel at this point. So you can see I lost some tanks, got the rocket asymmetric. This is where the problems began. I started having a lot of issues because I badly placed struts, badly placed separators, badly placed boosters. You have to see the rockets getting destroyed time after time. As I started to get frustrated, I cared less about planning and more about just fixing it. And it just, led to more and more crashes. And there I lost, half my boosters, just pretty much everything. Just failing in mass. So I started doing some tests, tried to do some separator tests on the ground, and the rocket ripped itself apart and kind of glitched out. Got some more teardown. You can see here that when you have those separatrons, they sometimes don't fire properly even when in sequence. That was kind of a pretty failure. So there are the separatrons firing beforehand, and it still didn't work right, and the rocket just ripped itself apart. There's that kind of glitch again with the additional separatrons. And more first stage ram through. Alright, so finally I got really frustrated, just put in the medium-sized solid-state boosters. And that kind of fixed my problems. It wasn't the best design, but considering how frustrated I was, it got the job done. So here I've got a nice stable flight, transitioning to the final stage. So I got a design that worked after a lot of swearing, and I wanted to tweak it a little. So I'm adding more fuel in various ways, seeing if I could do an 8-way symmetry. That didn't work real well. So I went back to 6. Reconfigure the boosters a little, add some more second stage fuel. So I kicked those second stage boosters on to get some more thrust here. Drained that final solid state tank before I detached it. Cooking pretty well in a sustained orbit. Then I'm setting myself up for docking. Getting my orbit to nearly match where my station is. And you can see on the right side of the nav ball is my amount of burn I need to do in meters per second. So I line that up with my proposed trajectory. I'm fine-tuning it so I get a meetup or near 1 kilometer intersection, or intersection I should say. And again, this is really sped up. It takes a little while to do this, even with the mod that I'm running that makes it easier. So I get near where I need to do my burn. Alright, so now flying right by the ship, or I should say the station I'm trying to dock with. Doing a little bit of an adjustment to get closer. And you can see that my speed in the middle above the nav ball has changed to target, because I want to essentially match my target speed and then creep up on it. So I'll get to that proper burn point again. And focus on my ship. Now that the approach, you can see it's pretty close by now. So I'm trying to orient my ship towards it with that circular magenta icon. And do a little bit of burn to decrease that target speed difference. This is kind of a laborious process sometimes. After I close it a little bit using the magenta icon, I then switch over to burning retrograde, and that drops the speed off quite well, you'll see in a moment. And like I said before, anything below 1 kilometer is considered you know, good for docking, or at least to start. So now to switch to a retro burn, you can see that target meters per second just drops. And now that I've gotten my retro to go down, now I can use that magenta and the prograde to creep up. And this is where it can get kind of frustrating. Docking is really tough in this game. I've done it, you know, maybe a dozen times now, but each time you get a little bit better at it. I'm not great, I can get it done, but it's not the most efficient thing. So I set that docking port as my target, and I'm using the RCS thrusters as long with the front-facing thrusters to control my ship. And goal is to be going very slowly, you know, ideally about 0.1 meters per second towards the target. And especially when you're as frustrated as I was, it takes a little bit of time. You need to kind of do a slight adjustment and then watch. If you overcompensate, then you have to, you know, compensate again in the opposite direction. Kind of an equal and opposite reaction type of thing with the physics laws. As you can see here, I've gotten pretty close. Now the final fine-tuning. So now you're just barely creeping up to that docking port. And we're docked. So now I'm transferring fuel into the station from all the tanks, along with the mono fuel. And I had a little bit too much, so I started dumping some into that secondary dropship that I had from another video. And the point of the dropship was so I could take astronauts from a voyage home and reuse the landers. So I'll get as much fuel of this thing as I can get out of it, and then I will put just a little bit into it so I can fly it back to Earth and recover the dropship part, the payload module husk. So to couple that, and burn a little bit retro to get towards Earth. So I want to land on the land versus the ocean because the physics in the ocean are screwed up and it rips your ship apart. So I do a little tiny burn here and there. I'm landing in the Arctic. Ideally you make the most money if you land back near Kerbal Space Center. I wasn't really worried about that at this point. I just wanted to land the stupid thing. So I pull my chutes and that slows me down. They get a lot more effective at about 500 meters. You can see my surface velocity drastically decreasing, and eventually kick off the time warp, or I should say the fast forwarding. You can see slowly descending. Ideally I like to be below like 4 or 5 meters per second just to minimize damage. I think I lost a couple engines there, but I recovered most of the ship. The recovery of this ship was about 25 grand. So here you can see my final design with tweaks. I wasn't even originally going to do this, but I decided to tweak it a little more. So I added some fuel tanks to transfer fuel from the first stage into the second. I added more tanks on the drop-off sections. I added the mainsail in the middle as you saw before. I've got the large second solid-state boosters, connected these with struts. And you see there's a little bit more first stage fuel. And then while my station is full, I just flew it up for explanation purposes, so it's near the second space station orbit. So I figure whenever I drain it and need more fuel, the ship will be out there and I can just dock it real quick. So right now I'm matching up my launch with the orbit of the space station. And we're off. So with these larger second stage boosters, I got a lot more speed, and I was getting, you know, towards or over that magical 200 meter per second first stage of the atmosphere limit. So I actually was burning at about 90 or 80% my liquid fuel thrust because I didn't want to be, you know, out of control. So dropping off the fuel, burning the fuel in the second tanks, dropping those. Now I'm on all mainsails. Drop those off. Kick the upper stage rockets on. So now those middle rockets I have that are transfer fuel tanks allow the upper stages to keep its fuel full without me having to transfer. Get my orbit nice and sustained. Did a couple of tweaks because I was going a little bit faster than I expected. This is finally empty, so I dropped the whole first stage section off in just a moment. I'm just waiting for these transfer tanks to drain. So everything's empty, so time to get rid of this thing. You can see my burn's about 2 minutes. It's not too terribly bad. I'm near the top of the parabola, so it's pretty efficient. So it's now sustained, and I want to tweak it just so I have one end on a slightly elliptical orbit that's above my space station trajectory, and the other one just dead on. So that's pretty good for a start. I'll use this later on. So with this improved ship, I estimate I could get about 2 orange tanks up. Originally I got 1.77 up. I may be able to get even more. You know, I've got 2.5 tanks right now. I probably use less than half a tank to get all the way up there. So pretty good. This ship shown cost about $232,000. The ship that I flew last was about $212,000. So for about, $230,000, you can get at least 2 large orange fuel tanks and 2 large mono containers up to a space station, which is pretty good. I hope this video will help you with your designs, and thanks for watching.